It is but fitting that our next guest is Monique Coleman. You'll remember her as Taylor Mackenzie on High School Musical. Since then, she has worn many hats, including a stint as the first ever UN Youth Champion. Steve had a chance to speak with her a little bit ago. Take a listen.
Monique, it's so great to be with you today, and welcome to Washington. But I know that you've got a very large purview of the world as the United Nations first youth champion, which is something that I didn't know we had, but I really do want to try and understand, what is going on as the world looks at the United States and as our youth looks outward. What are some of the insights you have from that experience?
That's a great question. I think the first thing is I really feel like this generation, unlike others, really values transparency and authenticity. I think previously there was kind of this sense of there are things that happen behind the scenes, and then there are things that are happening in front. And I really feel like this generation really wants to make sure that they're just not just spoken about, but actually spoken to and included in policy, and really have a seat at the table.
When you're out there and I know your work, and a lot of our audience may know you from, the High School Musical. I know you from what you've been working on with civil justice, racial justice, youth justice, intergenerational communication. And as you kind of look at that question of the social infrastructure in this country and what we need to reach beyond lines, and I just want to be honest, because this is a toxic time in this country. And there are a lot of people left behind and left on the side, a lot of talent not, given an opportunity to succeed. When you're out there and engaging youth, but everybody, it's not just youth, but engaging everyone, how do you help them understand how to reach beyond some of these limitations that are built in and embedded in our society? Sorry to be so long-winded about it, but
no, that's a great question.
I mean it, yeah.
Yeah. The first thing that came to my mind is compassion. I think that is actually something that's missing from a lot of our conversations. So many of them are extremely polarizing, and I think that the link between parties, the link between people, is having a compassionate viewpoint, recognizing that oftentimes we're coming from similar places. Like you said, I've extensively traveled. When I was the United Nations Youth Champion, I traveled to 24 countries in a 6-month period, and I showed up with ignorance. I showed up with questions. I came into situations expecting to listen more than to speak. And I think in many instances, we are trying to push our own agendas forward. But what I'm seeing, and one of the things that I saw really heavily last year, with everything with Black Lives Matter and these big movements, is sometimes I question whether or not we're really looking for solutions, or we're just looking for a platform to be able to speak about our problems. And I think that this, more than ever, we need to kind of shift our focus to listening and being open to the possibility that people are not inherently vindictive, that we're not inherently evil or seeking to tear one another down, but in fact trying to move forward in the best way that we know how. And to me, that link is truly through compassion.
Monique, that's such a beautiful framing. And I just want to be honest that there's a lot of insecurity and anxiety in the country about the younger generation coming on. Folks that have been in power, et cetera, they may be trying to do what they want, maybe not, who knows, but, holding them to account is important. But, we have created a brand called wokeism or woke culture. And you just said something that I was surprised to hear, that as we try to push for change and social justice, you're very clear that vindictiveness is not a part of it. And there's a lot of people that fear that vindictiveness is. Have you dealt with that a little bit?
I think it's something that you can't help but to see and observe. But again, I think that empathy, when I hear people and they're coming from this perspective, I try to see what is the lens that you're viewing the world through. I'm very fortunate to be able to live in a country that has a lot of privilege. I live in a state inside of that country that also has a lot of privilege, and I'm not unaware of that. And so sometimes when I'm hearing people, I recognize your experience might just be very limited. And instead of arguing, I think we should focus on educating and being open to the possibility that our role in when we see an issue is to contribute to that instead of just picking it apart and breaking it down and continuing to perpetuate some of the same kind of negativity and argumentativeness that we've been seeing over these last few years.
I know you're out there, as still a youth champion, really, and I'm
Always,
just curious how young people look at social justice today, how that may have looked different, say 20 years ago as today. What are some of the new currents of what social justice means? Because we see political engagement high, we see a lot of youth being engaged. I'm just interested in how they're gonna. This forum is called A More Perfect Union. It's about the future, and I'm interested in how they want to sculpt the future.
Yeah, well, I will definitely say that I still believe that young people are very much the change makers on our planet. And inside of that, I actually wanted to bring up something that I haven't really heard people talk about, especially on this forum. What I'm trying to say is that this is the perfect place to bring this topic up, not that it hasn't happened, is the fact that one thing that I notice and am concerned with is the amount of pressure that we're putting on this generation I think I'm going to call it cyber trauma that I feel is starting to brew, and I feel like in some ways I may have even contributed to this by really letting young people know that you're never too young to make a difference, which is true. You are never too young to have a voice, which is also true. You are the leaders of today and not necessarily the leaders of tomorrow. All very true. However, I think that it's really important in terms of bridging this intergenerational gap that we don't overly emphasize or fetishize youth to the point where we are giving them a responsibility for worlds that you're inheriting that you haven't even gotten to experience yet. And so my concern in some ways is that, yes, empower young people, give them the opportunities that they're asking for, but also support them and nurture them inside of these opportunities. Because what happens is, we look at youth as leaders and we're like, whoo, great. These young people are the most woke generation we've ever seen. They're not apathetic. They're really passionate and so forth. But then we're so quick to immediately criminalize them and demonize them when they don't get it right. And I think when they don't get it right, instead of just being hyper focused on them, I think that's an opportunity for us to look back at ourselves and say, well, what am I doing to ensure and to really support what young people are, the agendas that we're trying to move forward and that many young people are exhibiting this leadership in? I want to make sure that we as the adults supporting young people are not sitting in a seat of complacency and sort of expecting that they are just going to take over and lead perfectly in this very imperfect situation that they were born into.
Well, first, Monique, I just want to thank you because that issue has not come up in the forum, and I had not thought about cyber trauma and the kind of, odd mix of expectations and responsibilities and accountability that everyone feels. Because, kids also need to, be able to fail and to pick themselves up and come back and be protected and come back, which is such an important insight. And I really am grateful you shared. Let me just ask you finally, one of the concerns I have over the last 2 years is we've seen not only the murder of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and others, many others. I mean, I hate to just mention those, but I will mention them. And then COVID and the impacts we've seen on COVID, which have been disproportionate in the country. You look at the story of inequality and people who were so severely economically impacted across the board. And I just worry that as we get eventually to the other side of this, that we will forget the important lessons in the period we had and what we need to, one, get our social contract back in order, even things out where we can. And I'd just be interested. I mean, I don't want to put so much responsibility on you for it, but what do you think about this? I mean, what should we be doing collectively from you're an engaged citizen. How should we be thinking about it? And do you worry that we're just going to all get amnesia after what we just went through?
I'm going to be honest. I do worry about that at times. I do feel like, did we come out of this better than we went into it? And I definitely see that there's an opportunity to do so, but it really, I think will have to do with making sure to actually have conversations like the conversation that we're having right now, to create spaces where people can share openly and honestly and safely, where you are safe to disagree, where you're safe to not have the same point of view. But I do have hope. And I think without hope, there's no future. And so I try to always lead with what I would like to see instead of leading with my fears, which is, I think, part of how we got to where we are in the first place. Is when we're leading with the things that we're afraid of, they often become self-fulfilling prophecies. So I am hopeful that we are going to learn the lessons that we've been given the opportunity to, and really slow down, listen, pay attention to one another, and recognize that even as we solve problems, with every problem that we solve, we actually create more problems. And so we're never really going to be done. I think every generation gets their handful of things that they get to solve. And that's part of the human experience. And instead of looking for perfection, I think we should really focus on progress.
Well, Monique Coleman, the United Nations first youth champion, actress, entrepreneur, philanthropist, really appreciate your insights in these times. I think they're so profound, really, really interesting. I'm grateful that you spent some time with us, and I hope you'll come back many more times. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.